Hello and welcome to another episode of the Renewable Energy Movement podcast powered by Kigyo. This week we have Kim Collins. Kim is Director of Development for Clearlight Energy and has significant exposure on the North American market, both the USA, Canada and wider regions. Yeah, thanks for being here, Kim.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great stuff. As ever, we try and start at the very beginning. So let's talk a little bit about your initial entry into renewables and maybe where you first studied in college is a good place to start.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah, I studied engineering physics at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. Inside my program, there was a little bit of renewables, there was solid state mechanics, and there was fiber optics. So I wasn't really focused on renewables at all from the beginning. After leaving college, I did end up joining ABB. Although it wasn't really completely aligned with what I studied, they did offer this really fantastic new grad program that I was attracted to.
Yeah, and I guess even though maybe you had a little bit of exposure to renewables, like it was quite clear that you wanted to become an engineer. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that, I decided in high school, actually. Part of that motivation actually came from three of my parents' good friends were engineers, three guys, just almost like uncles, really. And they had really just encouraged me to pursue that. So to the point where even in Canada, all of our engineers wear iron rings. You can kind of identify us by wearing iron rings. And one of the guys came and gave me my iron ring at the end of my university studies there.
You wear it now?
I still wear it now. Yeah,
Wow.
I still very much like to identify from my engineering roots. And you actually see that over my career, how I kind of drifted away from engineering and then brought myself back to engineering, which actually was what launched me into the renewables industry.
I think as of today, the figures are very different. I actually saw a stat where engineering degrees might even be majority female, or at least kind of close to parity. But I imagine that was quite different in those days. It was very much, excuse the nasty phrase, a man's world, right?
Yeah, I did go to school with quite a few guys, and some of them are still some of my closest friends to this day. But I also had a really actually unique experience in studying this kind of niche field of engineering physics, and did graduate with 33% women in my graduating class in 1997. Yeah, It was a bit unusual, but it was great. But yeah, definitely the majority back then were the guys.
I mean, ABB must have been a fantastic company to be first exposed to. They've obviously got a really global presence and they work in a number of different fields. But what was the first time that you actually went in and worked in a renewables company?
Oh, so the first time I was exposed to renewables was actually back in 2010. I had spent 10 years with ABB, and then I had decided actually to take some time and spend some time home with my three kids, which were some pretty fantastic years. And then I was looking to get back into work, and in 2010, the province of Ontario was launching its feed-in tariff program for the first time. So they were motivated to come off of their last bits of coal. And I picked up a contract job with Ontario Hydro, which is Hydro One. And the role in for that 1 year was to explain to the junior developers the rules of how to apply for grid space and those feed-in tariff contracts. So I just was almost in like a customer service role where we were taught the rules of the feed-in tariff program, and then we just fielded all of the calls from the junior developers, told them which transformer station they would and which transmission line they would be connecting to, and helping them fill out what was called like Form A and Form Bs back then to get them into the queue so that they could be amongst the ones that would have been selected by the province.
Got you. And were you sitting there with your engineering hat on at that time?
Yeah, it was very regulatory. And one of the other roles that I played in that year was that they were looking to refine their interconnection agreements. They would have a pro forma, and not all pro formas were fitting all different contracts. So one of the activities I did was actually just to, and this is where some of the engineering did play in, was that we had to look at whether there were like different agreements, whether there were transfer trip schemes for different and whether the small ones really needed them or the large ones. So we ended up just working, creating a stakeholder engagement across the different departments in Hydro One and creating portfolios with and without the different technology needs for the interconnection of the different size of sites, basically.
Got you. And was that specifically focused on Ontario, or was there a wider?
No, this one was specifically focused on Ontario, and then they awarded about 2.5 gigawatts of contracts back then. Because of that, they were able to retire their last coal facility after those 2.5 gigawatts of renewables came online in Ontario. And then after that is when that program retired. So they didn't keep the feed-in tariff program going on and on because it was quite attractive offtake agreements. So they just wanted to have a good push into the grid of renewables, retire the coal. And then since then, they have swapped their approach to more of an RFP style where you bid in your pricing. They've launched those in more measured RFPs over the past few years. But at that time, when I met a junior developer there, actually, I'm going to call him out by name because he was kind of pivotal to why I am now having this career in renewables. His name is Steve Leroux, and he had brought a whole bunch of his projects to Ontario. And we had met during that 1 year that I worked at Hydro One. That contract ended and I chose not to carry on with Hydro One. I actually went back and spent a few more years with my kids.
Yeah.
But during that time, I had kept in touch with Steve, and he actually ended up joining all of his projects with a company called SEMA Plus, which is, an engineering firm. And he had called and we had kept in touch a couple times. He wanted me to come back as a project manager. But I had drifted so far from engineering at that point, and I was desiring to get back into really truly sitting down with the drawings and digging right into the weeds of this. Eventually, SEMA posted a role for a protection and controls engineer at junior level. And by that time, I had been out of school for 17 years, I think. And I phoned him up and I said, Steve, I would really love this job. And he kind of laughed at me because he said, this is a job that new grads get out of university. And I said, yes. But this job is speaking to me. I want to learn how to create, 3 lines and single lines because I just hadn't had that experience to this day. And I did go in for 2 years and just sat and learned how to do protection and control schemes for substations, for wind and solar facilities. During my time at SEMA, it was like a half a gig worth of solar and wind in 2 years of the engineering. I loved it.
That's quite a unique move, let's say. It's unusual for someone to go to a role that's deemed too junior for them, but we will get to this a little bit later. I imagine that stood you in extremely good stead in your future roles or even where you are today, right?
100%. I mean, one of the things when I look back on my time, even at ABB, I did some distributed control systems programming. And so that was a little bit of SCADA stuff. And then at the end of my career at ABB, I had gotten myself into sales of medium and high voltage power equipment, like main power transformers and distribution size transformers, dead tank circuit breakers, that kind of stuff. It just wasn't the best fit. Even though I'm a little bit of an outgoing engineer, I wasn't really feeling the sales. But I still look at all of those different experiences with the equipment, with the programming, and then really launching and diving in those 2 years with SEMA Plus. I left that time 10 years ago with a really good understanding of the technology at the electrical level, at the substation, at the transmission, right from that kind of transmission point of interconnection through the substation and through your collector system down to your to either your wind or your solar.
And at this point, through the role with SEMA and also the contract you did with Hydro One, how does Ontario compare to the rest of North America in terms of advancements within renewables? Did you have any exposure to other regions or areas then, or were you just focused only on Ontario?
We can say in Ontario that, we've been coal-free for over a decade now, which is great. And we're starting to see that the province more recently that has really ingress their renewables was Alberta. And so they brought in a huge amount of renewables, and they're actually pushing close to 20% of their grid is powered by renewable energy now. And they brought in quite a bit fast. So they were also able to retire all of their coal, and they've been coal free since June of 2024.
Yeah, and
But
that, excuse me for my ignorance, but that's still early compared to large parts of North America, right?
absolutely. Alberta had set a goal to become coal-free by 2030, and they did it 6 years earlier. And just now we're starting to see other provinces like Nova Scotia is one that's just on fire right now. You know, they've got a lot of offshore wind opportunities coming into that province. I do believe that, you know, even though Alberta needed to take a pause, you know, you bring a lot in, they needed to do a restructuring on their energy market. This has caused a pause of a couple of years. Makes a lot of sense though, but I think we're going to see them come back because they have a goal of reaching 30% from what I understand by 2030 still.
Yeah, really, really cool. Yeah. So going back a little bit to the timeline now, so then you spent a couple years in this like project and controls role at SEMA. Um, then came the move to where you are still to this day, right?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, the first time I heard about the company Algonquin Power was actually when I was at Hydro One. One
Yeah.
of the guys said to me, "We should keep an eye on these guys because they were growing quite quickly." So as the project started to COD and come, and there wasn't as many renewables opportunity in Ontario, you know, 10 years ago, it really kind of faded off for a little bit. It's back strong, but then I managed to pick up a role as a senior electrical engineer at Algonquin Power. So when I had joined Algonquin Power, they were just celebrating their 1 gigawatt mark. So they kind of developed, owned, and operate 1 gigawatt of wind and not so much solar back then. They'd only had about 10 megawatts of solar, I think, on their fleet when I joined the company. So I joined as a senior electrical engineer, and we were building about 2 projects a year, I'd say back then. But over the 7 years that I worked specifically as an engineer for Algonquin, we ramped up to 4 or even 5 projects a year. Over that time, I had a really amazing opportunity. The development department split into purely development and construction, and they asked me to lead up the engineering group of the construction team. So that was the opportunity that allowed me to grow into director of engineering for Algonquin, and I was able to build up the team to like about 6 engineers. And during that time, we built just over 2 gigawatts of wind and solar for Algonquin over those years.
That's really, really cool. And what geographies were you covering with Algonquin then? Where were where are all your projects?
Well, that was the beautiful thing about the opportunity at Algonquin is that we were in Canada and in the States, primarily in the States. We ended up building projects that were in about 12 different states, and I had the opportunity to work with 5 of the RTOs there. Names like PGM, MISO, ERCOT, CAISO, like really got introduced to all of the different ISOs there in the US.
What were the immediate differences for you from having only worked on, you know, more local projects to now being active in a number of states in the US?
There's a lot of commonalities for the most part. For example, PJM is 10 times the size of the Ontario ISO. We were dealing with maybe peak demand of 16 gigawatts in Ontario, and they were dealing with 160 gigawatts. They're just a massive ISO. Even back there were a few funny conversations because I remember talking to one project manager from the ISO. There was a bit of sharing of knowledge, right? He was asking in Ontario if they were collecting met data. And I said, yeah, of course they're collecting met data. But even 10 years ago, PJM did not have in their rules that you must send met data to the ISO. So it was a lot of opportunities, I think, over those years to just share about how the different ISOs were approaching things.
Okay, there's political uncertainty when it comes to renewables, to whatever the market. We see it in Germany, in the UK, etc. How have you seen the impact of political uncertainty, most particularly in the US? Sorry, because that's what everyone talks about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're all dealing with the one big beautiful bill that's, taken away some of the opportunities. But it's really in the 10 years that I've been developing and constructing for Algonquin, which was
Yeah.
bought last year by Clearlight Energy. We have seen the different administrations and the different kind of tax incentives kind of come and go. So I do still really believe that it's a cyclical thing. We all know that renewables are here to stay, and we just kind of weather through the different administrations and just try to stay up to speed on what programs are out there that will benefit renewables, and then how do we weather through when it's not as favorable. And there's still a lot of opportunities in the US right now, especially since Clearlight is so well positioned with a large operating fleet.
Yeah.
There's opportunities to optimize that operating fleet. What we're seeing a lot now is even though maybe some of the new builds have cooled off a little bit, we're seeing opportunities to co-locate BESS to our existing operating facilities through what some of the ISOs are calling a surplus interconnection system. So they're just saying, you don't need extra grid space because you're just co-locating a battery to operate when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining. So they're starting to introduce opportunities like that. We're also seeing there's a great opportunities now to repower some of our older facilities. And then we're also, of course, like everybody's talking data centers. How can you not talk data centers? So we're looking at opportunities to partner with data centers.
I just wanted to just flip back to your when the team split out slightly, and you were able to lead the engineering function, particularly in the construction side of the group. Was that the first time you'd kind of led a team at that point, or had you had a bit of exposure to team management before then?
Yeah, no, that actually is exactly when I moved into moving away from being an individual contributor, as we call it, and into more managing a team. I actually just loved it. I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges of moving into managing a team is that when you're kind of accustomed to being a top performer and getting a little pat on the back, you really have to take that step back and really put all your efforts into building up your team and letting them get the pats on the back. But I mentioned that just because one of my close friends said that, when you move into management, you want to build a team of rock stars, really.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of your job to do that and to clear any barriers for them so that they're like the most successful at their job.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it takes some humility because you want them to get the kudos and you just want to clear the road for them.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to do, but you want to try and hire people that are good at the things that maybe you're not good at. You have a skilled team that's covering all bases. Sometimes that requires a little bit of looking inside. That's quite difficult to do because it's hard sometimes to admit what you're not good at.
Tommy, this is one of the reasons why I think I was so attracted to your and Aphrodite's posts on LinkedIn and how we got kind of connected in the first place is you just bring that truth and that humility to it. My current manager and I, we kind of joke about how we're kind of one person together, but we're one team together, but we do complement each other in areas that I am just not as strong as he is in, and vice versa. And hopefully together we can just create a really strong team.
So that first exposure that you had, was that all an on-site team, or were you managing a team remotely? That's another challenge.
Yeah, no, prior to COVID, we were fully kind of in the office, and some of my team would have been at site at the different project sites, but they would have been on contract. Like we would have hired electrical or civil inspectors to support the construction phase of the project. I had just a fantastic team. One of them I remember recruiting off of LinkedIn myself because I saw her capabilities. Her name's Jill Collins, and I just went, oh, yeah, shared name. Maybe there was a little bit of, but I just messaged her right off LinkedIn and said, I would love it if you were part of my team. And I just look back that actually worked out. It was just incredible.
Last year, maybe even pushing towards 12 months ago now, but you've done quite a lot of your own recruitment that way, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, we work the best as we can with our HR system. My referral by Steve Littera to me to SEMA set me on a path that I could never have predicted for myself. So, keep close to your network and those referrals.
We're still going on through your career, coming towards your next move was a move directly into project development, I think.
Yes, it was.
Talk us through that a little bit. What you were focusing on then? How was that change?
Yes. So when I was reflecting on my 10 years, I did a LinkedIn post where I talked a little bit about being at the right place at the right time. It doesn't mean that you're not a hard worker, and to use a Canadian expression, like you gotta, when you're given a project, put the puck in the net. But there is some luck involved. So I had come to, after 7 years of leading the construction engineers and for Clearlight, and then really going, I need something different. We can do this rinse and repeat, but I need a little bit more. And so I got together with Brenda Marshall, who is our senior VP of business development back then. I remember this. We had lunch on a Thursday, and I told her, I'm thinking about maybe going into the strategy group. And she said, if you go into strategy, you're an engineer, they're just going to put you into emerging technologies. And what I'd really like to see for you is that you come into the development group and you start to learn for the entire project. So the commercial side of things that you haven't had a lot of exposure to up until this point. And I said, yeah, you're right. That's a good idea. And I said, so when will you have an opening? And she kind of laughed. She said, oh, no idea when to have an opening, but we've had the conversation, so let's just wait and see. Tom, I kid you not, the very next day, she phones me up and she said, well, you will not believe it. We've just had a director of project development resign. So we just had a good laugh about that. And I said, well, I'll send you my resume.
Yeah.
And that just the fact that one colleague chose to go and work somewhere else just opened an opportunity for me that, again, I mean, how does that happen, right? It just get lucky sometimes.
Yeah, and it's quite I spoke to somebody yesterday directly about this topic. They had an engineering background and they ended up going into a project development role. I kind of challenged that maybe that isn't a traditional route. They kind of agreed, but at the same time, there's so many things that you will cover as an engineer that gives you so much advantage in a project development field. Yeah, you might not have exposure to the landowners. Yeah, you might not have that exposure to the municipalities that you can learn. But actually, when it comes down to grid connections, when it comes down to kind of actually the projects themselves, you're almost at an advantage to your peers. So did you find something similar?
Yeah. There's so many transferable skills into that. And I had an incredible team around me that, people that had worked in the industry, in the company actually for 20 and 30 plus years and stuff. So really open to me asking really some of the most basic questions and stuff. So I would say my biggest learning curve was learning to be honest, the permitting process was one of the biggest ones. And they vary so much from region to region,
Yeah.
and then just the volume of permits from federal to state or provincial level down to the county or municipality level. That was interesting. But yeah, that, and then of course the commercial side, your energy markets, your PPAs, your off takes and stuff like that. As an engineer, you have some exposure to that because you're helping the team set up metering schemes in your substation. But really locking in those offtake agreements when they're just virtual PPAs with some RECs, some green RECs, it's not what you have a lot of exposure to. It's been a great part of it, I think, is that when I was an engineer at SEMA, I had a really small piece of the pie. I had protection and control. Then
Yeah.
when I moved into engineering at Clearlight Energy, I was able to expand that out into the entire of the engineering, the interconnection, how like the entire facility altogether. And then now this just felt like a very natural transition to then start to loop in land discussions, permitting discussions, the commercial side and the offtake discussions.
And just on that topic of permitting, you're also dealing with, well, at least two countries, number of different states. like you say, a number of different local municipalities. So how do you navigate that landscape? And I'm sure you can't be an expert in all of the areas that you have projects.
No, not at all. So my colleague Sean Fairfield, who's our VP of Tech Services, he's been in the permitting industry for more than 30 years, and he's built up a team that supports this effort. Honestly, it's a full-time job. Our permitters that are looking into it, they read a lot of ordinances. So the project managers that lead now, you got to dig in and you just got to read a lot of ordinances. You got to read a lot of land use bylaws, and you got to understand what the rules are in the areas in which you're playing in now.
From like a project perspective, what are some of the size of the projects that you're running now, managing now?
Yes, so the projects now are in around the 200 megawatt size. So the largest project that I worked on was a project in Texas, and it was 500 megawatt wind facility. And the projects these days that we're working on, the ones in Canada, are about 200. And then the Alberta project that I'm working on has a co-located BESS as well. So it's got a 50 megawatt 2-hour BESS system in there.
I think you mentioned this earlier in the conversation. Areas of Canada now, there are areas in Nova Scotia where offshore wind is becoming popular. Is that right?
Yes. I don't have all of the details on the Nova Scotia, the size of things, but I was excited to read an article the other day. The offshore wind in Nova Scotia is really taking off. It's not an area Clearlight Energy has chosen to participate in. We haven't chosen to participate in the Nova Scotia market, but that's only from a resource planning kind of perspective. Canada's a big place, and there's markets, calls for power being opened right now in Manitoba, BC, and Ontario. Those are the markets that we've chosen to pursue.
Got you. And the markets that you pursue in the US?
Yeah, so LS Power bought the Algonquin generating portfolio. They split it into Clearlight, which is the operating assets, plus any new builds in Canada. So we're not actually pursuing new greenfielding opportunities in the US. We're just looking to optimize our existing assets. Any greenfielding is done in Canada. And then what they did was they took the greenfielding opportunities and they put those into another company of theirs called Rev Renewables. And Rev Renewables is the company that's continuing the greenfielding of the sites in the US.
Interesting. Okay. So it's like a two-pronged attack.
Yeah, they split it up that way. It's been really interesting, and such a good time to be in the Canadian market.
It sounds like it, yeah.
There's one aspect to the Manitoba and the BC projects. The country is really interested in partnering with our First Nations. So for what we're starting to see more of is 51% and more equity ownership with First Nations in our renewable facilities. There's a really fantastic opportunity.
Just elaborate on that for me a little bit, First Nation.
Our Indigenous communities who have lands that are often adjacent or part of the renewable energy facilities.
What opportunities do you see for Canada, maybe specifically within Ontario, that you potentially didn't see 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities in Canada right now. Ontario is running its second call for power. BC is having a call for power. Manitoba is having a call for power. And these are just like one of multiple that we're expecting over the years. Same with Nova Scotia. We're just starting to see the discussion around the renewables ramping back up again, which is just fantastic. As I'd mentioned, Alberta was on a bit of a pause, but if I was to offer out one prediction, I do see that market coming back. And they did mention wanting 30% of their energy to come from renewables. They're close to that 20% mark. So there's a nice amount of opportunity still left.
Great. And what was the reason for the dip? You mentioned the words like coming back a few times now. What was the reason that it went the wrong way?
I wouldn't say they went the wrong way. I would say they took a necessary pause because the energy market was on a single pool pricing scheme before, and they're moving now to local marginalized pricing, and they're just making, I guess in my mind, some necessary changes for the long-term health of the energy market there. And that takes some time. It's all kinds of energy sources together. While the goal would be to come off of coal, we can't be unrealistic to think that that means that we're going to immediately always come off of natural gas as well. And in Ontario, 60% of our energy is derived from nuclear. So one of the things that we're also seeing in Ontario is the small nuclear reactor. The province has actually made an investment into that at one of our nuclear facilities. So we're going to see a combination of things for the next foreseeable future, for sure, of which renewable still plays a huge part of that.
Yeah, indeed. Even natural gases has been a little bit frowned upon, I think, at times within renewables, but I do envisage the same, that there will have to be, multi-utility approaches in the future. Before we finish, because I always spend a lot of time with my European guests talking about this topic, what about the grid connection? How is this connection to the Canadian grid? Is it causing bottlenecks like it causes in a large portion of the world, or are you in a better position there?
Everybody does still talk about grid congestion and how we're going to have to address that, and they are. But I did read an interesting article recently that said really our congestion issue is for a few critical hours in the grand scheme of an entire year. And so if they could put the focus there to how do you ensure your stability during those few critical hours, to which, I think that storage can play a part in that. There is a thought that we're going to come through these congestion troubles right now a little bit more easier than we think.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I remember from a previous conversation we had that there wasn't the same doom and gloom with the grid connection in your region that there is potentially in some areas in Europe, Spain, Germany, etc.
Yeah, it's funny, we hear both, and I think that in North America and in Alberta, certainly they would say they are experiencing some congestion, and they're looking to build out a very significant transmission line there. I put myself in the camp of it not being so doom and gloom. I think that it's solvable. There's a lot of really smart people out there. We just have to look at those few critical hours of the day over the year that are causing the congestion.
Awesome. Kim, thanks so much for coming on and being a guest. You gave us a really great insight into both your wonderful career and also a bit of market exposure to the States and Canada. Thank you.
You're welcome, Tom. Thank you so much. I'm very flattered that you had me on your podcast.
Yeah. Our pleasure. Maybe we do it again at some time.
That'd be great.